In the spring of 1881, in a soot-stained town of northern England, whispers began to circle through cobbled streets and factory yards. They were not about politics or wages, nor even the endless smoke that hung over the river. They were about a child. He was no more than 12 years old, slight and pale, the kind of boy who might otherwise be forgotten in a crowd of coal-dusted faces. But his dreams would not let him be ordinary. He spoke of fires before they were lit, of waters rising before the rain had fallen. One morning he told his mother, in a voice calm and steady, "The river will rise, and the houses will fall." Days later, the floods came, sweeping through cottages and mills with the exact fury he had described. The story spread with the current, carried by gossip and by the pages of the local press. Headlines hinted at a boy prophet, a child whose sleep became an oracle of ruin. Some saw him as chosen, touched by God's hand in an age hungry for signs. Others recoiled, whispering that no child should know such things unless he was cursed, or worse, possessed. Yet the boy continued to dream, each vision heavier than the last, each prophecy a burden no child should carry, and each one, impossibly, came to pass. Even now, more than a century later, the question lingers. Was he truly a messenger of fate, or a warning that disaster itself can find a voice in the most unlikely of places? To understand why the story of a dreaming child unsettled so many in 1881, we must step into the world of Victorian England. It was an age of contrasts. Steam engines thundered across the countryside, cities swelled with factories and smoke, and newspapers carried the promise of progress to even the smallest towns. Yet beneath the iron and industry, fear still lingered, the old fears of curses, omens, and divine punishment. Victorian society was steeped in contradictions. On one hand, science marched forward with bold discoveries, Darwin's theory of evolution, advances in medicine, new machines that seemed almost magical. On the other, spiritualism was thriving. Seances were held in drawing rooms, mediums claimed to hear voices from the beyond, and newspapers eagerly printed tales of ghosts, visions, and prophecies. The line between reason and superstition was never straight. It blurred, shifted, and often collapsed in the face of tragedy. 19th century disasters haunted. Factories burned with terrifying frequency, their wooden frames consumed in minutes. Coal mines collapsed, swallowing men whole. Rivers flooded, carrying away homes and livelihoods. Epidemics moved silently through streets, leaving grief in their wake. To live in Victorian Britain was to live in constant shadow of catastrophe. And when catastrophe struck, people looked for signs they had missed. Omens, warnings, the whisper of fate they had failed to hear. It was within this climate of uncertainty that stories of prophetic children found fertile ground. Folklore had long carried the idea that the young were closer to the unseen, their innocence a fragile bridge to the divine or the uncanny. In rural England, tales of seer children had circulated for generations. Children who spoke of deaths before they occurred, who dreamed of storms before clouds gathered, who described funerals that had yet to be held. By the late 1800s, newspapers amplified these tales. A small column buried among market reports might note, "A lad of tender years predicted the fire that struck the mill at Halifax." Such stories were retold in pubs and parlors, gaining weight with each retelling. In America, similar reports appeared in local presses, weaving a transatlantic pattern of belief. Children as reluctant prophets of doom. And so, when the boy of 1881 spoke of floods and fires before they came, his story fit neatly into an existing tapestry of fear and fascination. He was not the first child to dream of disasters, nor would he be the last. But the timing, an era of both relentless progress and persistent superstition, ensured that his voice carried further, darker, and more enduring than most. The first dream came quietly, as dreams often do. The boy awoke pale and trembling, his eyes wide as though he had wandered too far in his sleep. At the breakfast table he spoke with unusual certainty. "The river will rise, and the houses will fall." His parents exchanged nervous glances. In a town where the river had long been both lifeline and threat, such words sounded less like imagination and more like warning. They tried to dismiss it. Children dream strange things, they told themselves. But unease gnawed at them. And when the boy repeated the same phrase to neighbors in the days that followed, the whispers began. Then the rains came, heavy, relentless, swelling the river beyond its banks. Within nights, the water surged into the streets, carrying carts and livestock, breaking through doors and sweeping away furniture. Houses closest to the river crumbled, their foundations no match for the torrent. The boy's words, spoken days before, rang in every villager's memory. Word spread swiftly. The local paper carried a brief note, curious tale of a child's dream, foretelling the flood. In an age hungry for stories of the uncanny, even a single column could fuel a storm of speculation. For the townsfolk, the coincidence was chilling. How could a boy of 12 foresee disaster so precisely? Was it divine grace, a gift bestowed to spare lives? Or was it something darker, a curse bound to his sleep, a tether between innocence and catastrophe? The boy himself seemed unchanged, quiet, contemplative, uneasy under the weight of attention. Yet he could not stop the dreams. And those who listened closely would soon learn that the flood was only the beginning. After the flood, the boy's words could no longer be dismissed as childish fancy. Neighbors who once laughed at his strange remarks now crossed themselves when he passed. Mothers pulled their children closer. And when he spoke again, people listened, though listening brought no comfort. Weeks after the waters receded, the boy dreamed of fire. He described it with a clarity that unsettled even his parents. The roar of flames, the crack of beams collapsing, the suffocating smoke that swallowed breath. He pointed toward the direction of the mill, insisting that was where the fire would come. Days later, in the dead of night, the mill erupted in flames. Sparks leapt into the sky, painting the darkness red. Workers scrambled to save what they could, but the building was lost, reduced to ash just as the boy had described. This second prophecy spread farther than the first. The town's paper gave it more space, reporting that a lad's nocturnal visions did strangely precede the calamity. For some, this was proof of divine touch, a gift granted in an age desperately seeking signs of providence. For others, it was something sinister. No child should dream destruction so vividly unless he was bound to the forces that caused it. The boy became a figure of dread and fascination. Strangers arrived to question him, hoping to glimpse their own futures in his haunted eyes. But not all sought him kindly. Some whispered that if his dreams foretold disaster, perhaps ending his dreams would end the disasters themselves. The boy, caught between reverence and fear, grew quieter, retreating further into himself. But silence did not save him. His dreams persisted, heavy with images no child should carry. And soon, they would turn darker still. The dreams that followed were no longer of rivers or fire. They became far more personal and far more terrifying. One night, the boy awoke sobbing, clutching at his chest as though the weight of the world had pressed down upon him. When his mother coaxed him to speak, his words froze the room. He had seen coffins. He had seen the faces of neighbors laid out in mourning, candles burning beside them, black cloth draped over doors. And he named them, one by one. The family begged him to keep silent, but children rarely hold secrets. By morning, the names had slipped into the streets. People scoffed at first, uneasy but unwilling to believe. Yet within days, a fever swept through the town. The ill collapsed in their beds, and when death came, it was to the very homes the boy had named. Panic spread like wildfire. Some villagers fell to their knees, insisting the boy was a prophet sent to warn them. Others cursed his name, claiming he had summoned the deaths himself. To speak a name, they said, was to mark it for the grave. Fear twisted into anger, and the boy's presence became unbearable for those who saw their loved ones fall. For the boy, the visions brought no triumph, only sorrow. He wept after each dream, insisting he wanted no part in them, that he wished only for silence. But silence did not come. Night after night, the shadows of death gathered at his bedside, and each morning, reality followed. The townsfolk, once merely curious, now regarded him with dread. For in his dreams, life and death no longer belonged to God or fate. They belonged to the voice of a child. The boy's final days were cloaked in silence and rumor. After the fever deaths, the town could no longer bear the weight of his presence. Some whispered that his family, tormented by suspicion and hostility, fled in the dead of night, leaving their cottage empty. Others told darker tales, that he was taken from his bed by men who believed ending his life would end the calamities. The truth is more elusive. Local records grow thin, the newspaper columns fall quiet. Where once his dreams had been printed as curiosities, his name vanished from the page as if deliberately erased. By autumn of 1881, the boy prophet had disappeared from the town's memory, or perhaps was forced out of it. One story, passed down in hushed tones, claims he did not live long at all. They say he slipped into sleep one night and never awoke, his final dream claimed by the silence he had so often feared. His mother was said to have sat at his bedside, whispering prayers, until dawn revealed his stillness. Whether he fled, was taken, or simply faded away, the effect was the same. The visions ended. But with his disappearance came no relief, only emptiness. For the people of that town, the absence of prophecy was not comfort, but a haunting question. Had they lost a child cursed by darkness, or a voice meant to guide them through it? Across the Atlantic, in the hills of Appalachia and the farmlands of the Midwest, stories of prophetic children also circulated during the 19th century. Newspapers, always hungry for unusual tales, eagerly printed accounts of boys and girls who dreamed of disasters before they unfolded. One report from Kentucky told of a farm boy who woke screaming of a mine collapsing. His father, a miner, dismissed the dream, but the son insisted. Days later, an explosion tore through the shaft, killing dozens. Among the dead was the father, just as the boy had wept. In Pennsylvania, a young girl was said to have spoken of fire consuming her schoolhouse. Teachers hushed her, but within the month, lightning struck the roof and the building burned. While no lives were lost, the memory of her warning became etched into the town's folklore. These accounts shared common threads. Children on the margins of society, speaking of ruin in voices too small to ignore. Communities reacted with the same mixture of awe and terror. Some declared the children chosen by God. Others shunned them, fearing their words were invitations to doom. And just as in England, the stories often ended abruptly, the children disappearing, dying young, or fading into obscurity once their visions grew too heavy. Long before Victorian newspapers, Europe's folk traditions brimmed with tales of children who saw too much. In Ireland, seer children were said to dream of funerals days before they occurred. Families would hush the child, fearful that speaking aloud would hasten the death. In Scotland, ballads told of the dreamer's son, a boy whose sleep revealed storms and shipwrecks. Sailors would consult such children before setting out, though not always with gratitude. A prophecy of disaster was as often a curse as it was a warning. Continental Europe added its own versions. In rural Germany, stories circulated of Traumkinder, dream children who described floods and plagues with eerie accuracy. Priests alternately recorded them as signs of God's mercy or the devil's whispers. These tales reinforced a timeless motif. Children as unwilling vessels of foresight. Their innocence, paradoxically, made them dangerous. Too young to conceal what they saw, their words cut straight into the fears of their elders. And when disaster proved them right, fear turned quickly to resentment. The question of what these visions meant divided belief. For the faithful, prophetic children were evidence of divine intervention. Voices sent to warn communities of dangers they might otherwise ignore. Passages from Scripture spoke of young men seeing visions and children speaking truth, lending legitimacy to the idea. But superstition offered a darker reading. In villages bound by fear of witchcraft, a child who foresaw death could be accused of causing it. To name a person before the grave was to curse them. In some accounts, prophetic children were driven out, branded as omens rather than messengers. This tension between miracle and curse, messenger and monster, defined the way such stories spread. Each new account, whether in England, America, or Europe, echoed the same unease. If a child speaks the future, do we listen, or do we silence them before the vision becomes real? The legend of the boy prophet and others like him forces us into uneasy territory. For every attempt at explanation, something remains that refuses to fit neatly. The rational mind reaches first for psychology. Dreams, after all, are built from fragments of memory, fears, and subtle observations. A child living near a swollen river might sense danger unconsciously, the smell of damp, the sound of shifting currents, and translate that unease into a dream. Similarly, a boy who spends his days near factories and mills might already know how easily fire takes hold. When disaster strikes, the dream appears prophetic, though it may simply be heightened awareness. Science adds another layer. Children are often more sensitive to environmental cues than adults. The rumble of distant thunder, the faint tremor of shifting ground, the subtle fatigue of a sick neighbor. Could it be that prophetic children were simply acute observers, their minds weaving these unnoticed signals into visions that adults dismissed until too late? Yet explanations built on reason stumble against the uncanny precision of certain cases. How does a child name victims of illness before the fever even begins? How does a dream describe a collapse in detail no bystander could predict? Coincidence is the skeptic's shield, but coincidence cannot fully erase the chill such stories bring. For those who lean toward the spiritual, prophetic children are seen as vessels. Scripture speaks of chosen voices raised from the least expected places. To others, the accuracy of these dreams suggests not blessing but curse, the influence of forces dark, invisible, and opportunistic. The boy prophet of 1881, like the seer children of Appalachia or the dreamers of Germany, may have been less an agent of warning than a channel through which catastrophe itself announced its arrival. Perhaps that is the most unsettling idea of all, that disaster does not come unheralded, that it seeks out a voice, an innocent mouth through which to whisper its intent. And when the warnings are spoken, we are left with a choice, to heed them or to fear the one who bears them. By the end of 1881, the boy prophet had vanished from public view, swallowed by the silence of history. Whether his family fled, whether he died, or whether the townsfolk forced him into exile, no record remains. What endures are only fragments, yellowed newsprint, whispered recollections, half-remembered warnings passed down like folklore. The town rebuilt. The river returned to its quiet flow. The mill was raised anew, and the fever burned itself out. Yet none who lived through those months forgot the child whose dreams seemed to chart their ruin. Some claimed his absence brought relief, that without him, disaster no longer had a voice. Others confessed a lingering unease, that perhaps without his warnings, the next calamity might strike without caution. And so his story slipped into the space between memory and myth. A boy whose visions could not save him, a messenger whose message was never understood. He remains less a figure of history than a question carved into its margins. What is more terrifying, the child who dreams disaster, or the possibility that we need such children, and that without them we are deaf to the future? History leaves us with mysteries that do not resolve, but echo. The boy prophet of 1881 did not live long enough to explain his gift, or his curse. His voice lingers only in scattered reports and fearful whispers, reminders that fate sometimes chooses the most fragile of vessels. Some say he dreamed of disasters. Others say disasters dreamed through him. Either way, his story remains one of those faint, persistent echoes of the forgotten.